know that it's been really a rough time for those in our profession, but more importantly for the students that we're serving. And I have, I don't know if you've had a chance to see some support materials, resources for teachers to navigate what's going on at TESOL International. So I'm going to post that. I'll post that in Blackboard, the link to that. Otherwise, you can just go directly to TESOL.org, and I think the link is on the main page, but it's a list of, a whole list of links to resources. But if I know it's affecting many of us, I'll just share that, for example, personally, my husband is half Iranian, but he's also French. But his whole family's French-Iranian, and he's an American citizen, so he's planning to travel. But it hits home in so many ways, and to think that if something were to happen, and my most immediate family, that is our immediate family. We don't have a lot here. So if it's, my best to all of you who may be navigating similar situations, and I think we'll just take it a day at a time, right? So I just feel like I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to reflect on, or we can just know that we're all thinking of each other and our students, and anyway, so we'll just go ahead. But if anything comes to mind that you want to share during the webinar, please don't hesitate to. So to start with, we'll just look at the objectives for this topic, this session. We're going to focus on, after we do some sharing out of what you thought about since the last webinar, we're going to focus on listening and reading strategies instruction. And this is not news for us as ESL professionals, but just like last time, we're going to focus on it through this lens of rigorous instruction and what can we be doing at all levels? What kind of tweaks can we make to our lessons? To identify what those strategies can look like, and then think of those that really help us get into the more academic complex texts, and then think about why using nonfiction and informational texts is so important. So we're going to do it both for listening and reading, okay? So first we're going to spend time having you review and share out anything you tried since our last webinar. And then we'll focus on the strategies instruction, and then do some sample activities, and then think about what's next. And then just as last time, I'm trying to build in as much interactivity as we can. So we'll do a lot with the chat box again, where you can respond to a prompt, comment. But again, since the group is fairly small, I think we'll try to use more of the open mic and video today. So again, we can really be having a conversation among ourselves. All right? So we're going to start off with sharing. So Kate has set up some small discussion rooms where you will be able to talk among yourselves, comment, chat among yourselves. There's even a whiteboard where we'd like you, and she's, Kate, have you just done, how many groups do you think we should do now that with this number of participants?
Well, I think we have 2 groups set up. We can set up one more if you think that makes more sense. There would be 6 in one group and 5 in another group.
Maybe, let's see. Maybe, now is setting up a third easy enough to do right now, or
Yep.
Will that take some time? Okay, then I think let's do 3 groups.
Okay.
And as just because I think 6 people wouldn't give people as much time to share.
Okay.
But in your small groups, so I'd like you to chat about anything you tried since we last met in your class, or if you're an administrator and you thought about your elevator speech, about how you would share with others why rigorous instruction is so important. We'll give you 10 minutes to talk among yourselves, and we won't be there with you. You'll be on your own thinking about this question. However, I understand that it was the holiday time, or Sarah just shared that her program hasn't started up again yet. So you can reflect on something through the units or the readings or anything that's come to mind for you that was really significant that maybe you want to try, or some ways you're thinking about your teaching differently as a result of Webinar 1 and any work you did in Module 1 between last time and this time. So you'll have 10 minutes. I'll set a timer on my phone. But if you could, in your small group, choose a recorder make sure somebody is recording some highlights. And you don't have to, then repeat everything you talked about, but really sort of synthesize the ideas and see what really stood out for everybody. And then we'll do some whole group reports from a representative from each small group. And now just go from one group to the next and give you a chance to share out highlights of what you heard among yourselves. And let me hear, I'm going to turn to, I thought we could talk about what new ideas did people try? How did it impact instruction? Were there any challenges? Did people share information with others at their sites? For example, the folks who had their elevator speeches. You'll have to let us know. Maybe raise your hand if you were a reporter for your group. So if we go that way. So now, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Would you like to report for us?
Lots of feedback there. It sounds like somebody's on the highway.
So could somebody identify as a reporter for us? Maybe raise your hand and then you can open your mic and your video and share with us. Okay, do you want to, would you like to open your mic and do you have mic and video that you could open so we can hear you? Or Sarah, okay. Okay, well, okay. So is there somebody in your group that could share? Well, Sarah, you have your hand up. Do you should we start with you? I think for your group.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, actually, I would love if Isabel could unmute her mic, because in our group, Nayo couldn't do input, but she responded to what Isabel and I were talking about. And
okay.
We had a really great experience. I think it'd be great if she could tell us about it.
Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah.
This is Isabel, and what I did was I've used graphic organizers in the past, but in the past I've always done the lesson with the students reading, and then as a whole class had them tell me what should go in each part, and we filled out a graphic organizer together. But what I changed was this time, after they read the selection, I gave them a graphic organizer that had what, where, when, what were the traditions, what were the foods, those type questions, and partnered the students and had them do all the work.
Yeah, it's hard to hear. Somebody has some background noise on that's, I think what I've heard so far. That.
Can you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
That's much better. Yes, go ahead.
Good.
Thank you.
Then I had the students work with a partner. They discussed between themselves the information they read and where the information belongs, completed their own graphic organizers, then reported back to the class afterwards. I said, okay, so what were the foods, what were the traditions, and then as a class went over what they saw that belonged in each group. So
Great.
The students had to listen to what everybody was reporting back, and at the same time checking their own graphic organizers to see if it matched what they had found.
Great.
There was a tremendous amount of discussion between the students, much, much more than at other activities. It was they're doing the work and being focused and sharing with each other rather than just hearing rote answers and writing them down.
Excellent, excellent. So at the beginning when the sound was not too good, I think you were saying you'd been using graphic organizers, but it was more of a teacher-led, fill it in together. Is that what I heard? Did I hear that correctly? So this is a big shift then in your instruction. That's wonderful. So and then what I noticed, and I'd love to hear what others noticed. So it seems like it became a lot more learner-centered as well. I noticed, right?
Yeah.
I noticed that in a sense you're having them do they're assessing themselves by having to compare with others. What did others notice there? What stood out for anybody else in what Isabel just reported? Anybody, go ahead. You can just open your mic and speak. What else stood out for you that in that shift in Isabel's practice?
Hi, this is Sarah. What I thought was interesting, it's a shift to the students, and the students are kind of driving it. But what I really also liked was what Isabel mentioned about the self-assessment. So they think together in pairs, and then they hear what other people are thinking, and they have the graphic organizer as a way to organize what they're hearing and what they thought, and then they can really say, hey, are we in the same place or not? So it creates a really nice tool for listening and evaluating what they hear and where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you know, Melissa noted too in the chat box that it seems like there was a lot less teacher talk, a lot more student talking time?
There was, and it gave me the opportunity, while they were doing their work, for me to move around the room listening to their conversation and to see who was actively engaged and who was really struggling.
So anytime we switch it to having the students take the lead, it gives us much more space to monitor, don't you think? Right? It's hard to do that if we're the one up at the front. So wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really a very profound example, but yet a simple adjustment, right? So we're not talking about major changes in our instruction. It's just really making some sometimes very subtle changes that have really profound impacts. Who else? I know another group said they hadn't chosen a reporter, but I think that was Taryn's group. But just any one of you, if you could open up your mic and share some highlights from your discussion, that would be great.
This is Brandon. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Brandon.
Hey, how are you? I teach a level 1 class, and I've had great success recently with using authentic materials. My class had interest in learning about money, so I actually brought in flyers from the Sunday paper. And, I brought groups and prices, and it just opened up, a lot of conversation among the groups and teachers, and also generated new topics that we could talk about in the future, like what's a name brand compared to a generic brand, and also weights. Because at first they're confused because a lot of fruits and vegetables are sold by weight. And, these are real-world items that they need to know about. I just love using authentic materials over generic.
Yes, yeah. Well, in what you just described, I sense a nice level of higher order thinking and having to describe, for example, difference between a generic and a name brand, or it sounds like you were doing some numeracy as well. Am I right? I'm guessing. Yeah. Good. Anybody else? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Brandon. Brendan, I mean.
I'll say this one thing that was interesting was at level 1, as a native speaker, you don't realize how much information they pack in these flyers. So I think it was a little bit overwhelming. They try to put so much in, but I think it was a good experience for them.
So what did you do to help them read more selectively or not get too overwhelmed with all that language?
But just focus on maybe looking at pictures, looking at the pictures first instead of text. And I think a lot of them wanted to wear flyers because they don't buy, the English newspaper on Sunday. So I had them focus on pictures and then, then look at the text next.
Yeah, good. So anything else stand out for others as you listen to that example? Give you a second to think.
I got to watch this in action a little bit. This is Tesha.
Yeah.
I was struck with the amount of group work and student-to-student interaction in these activities, and just the sort of the way that students took ownership of trying to figure this out together, rather than sort of relying on the teacher to figure it out for them.
Yeah. Okay. So sort of similar to what Isabel reported as well in that regard, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Pesha, when you all were in your group, I noticed, and I still didn't have a chance to open it, I noticed you sent me your elevator speech. If you could just, if you had a chance to share that with anybody, to actually do your speech with anybody?
Gave to my group. It's too long, so that's good learning for me. But
what stood out? Yeah.
But Beth and Karen both did one-question interviews, activities, and then we're displaying and analyzing the data with students, and had some challenges along there. I don't know, Beth, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I have a level 3 class, so we did the one question interview, and my plan, the goal was to make predictions, collect data, display the data, analyze it, draw conclusions, do comparisons. I mean, I was thinking these are good higher level activities, but what I found out was that the students, and I also had the assumption that these are pretty logical things, but I found out that apparently they're not logical and they're not easy and they have to be taught.
Yeah. Okay. So
I was saying that I don't think my students got a lot out of the lesson, but I learned an incredible amount about how important it is to teach these things.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's just break it down. So you just named outcomes that might constitute, a couple of weeks of instruction. It sounds like, in a way, right?
Yeah.
And were you so at what point? Were there some successes initially, say doing the one question interview? At what point were you getting roadblocks, or were you hitting those roadblocks, would you say? What seemed to be initially, if you were to kind of break that down and think about how you could do it differently, to scaffold it a little bit more, what seemed to be the most challenging?
The collection part, the data collection actually went well, and I liked that because people were not only asking their question, there was conversation that was happening in addition. So that part was good.
Great success, yeah.
Yes, collecting the data was very successful. The displaying was okay. There was nothing really difficult about that. But when we hit the analyze part, I had a lot of blank faces.
Okay.
So I tried modeling a couple I would look at a couple situations for a couple of the questions and tried modeling some of the analysis, some of the things I was thinking about as I looked at the numbers. But I was getting blank faces in return. So I would start next time doing much simpler analysis and get people to start learning what that really means, how to do it.
Yeah. So I'll just suggest one thing, and maybe others can chime in. So maybe something where it's just a really clear compare and contrast.
Yes.
And then give them some language they could use, some sentence frames. I notice there are more people than whatever. You know what I mean? So maybe that would be one thing, is kind of target one particular thinking skill and then model that and have questions and collect data that lend itself maybe to something that's a little narrower. For example, what was your topic? What were you having them talk about?
The topic was, what language do they use in their everyday life? So we have 20 students, so there were 20 questions. So you go food shopping, do you use your native language or English? When you go to the bank, the doctor.
That's great.
All the different church, parent-teacher conferences.
Yeah.
all the different activities.
Yeah. I love your choice of topic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I love the choice of topic. So let's just open it up to others, some thoughts, because what that reminds me of is if anybody, I know you did, Sarah, I saw the lesson enhancement in my Unit 1 in Module 1 where one of the topics is use of first language and helping students understand that that's something that's valued and important. And I like that you chose that as a way for them to kind of analyze when they need English and when it's perfectly all right to use their first language, obviously. But sometimes it's worth, having a lesson like that really makes that apparent. I don't know, anybody else have any thoughts or reflections on what you just heard? Any suggestions or insights? Give you a second to think. Okay, Sarah, yeah. Yeah, Isabel?
In my class, what I have noticed is the students, when they're doing their work, if they're having trouble understanding something or they're not sure of the directions, they will converse in their native language with each other to explain and help each other. And during free time, they tend to speak in their native language rather than in English. And every once in a while, I'll catch them, or I'll just be watching them, and they'll realize, oops, I'm speaking my native language, not in English. And we've wound up chuckling at times in class because they see that I'm listening in, but they're obviously not speaking English. It's very helpful when you have a student that is not as adept with the English, working with someone that is more able to be able to speak their native language in their comfort zone to explanation that I, as a teacher that does not speak their native language, would not be able to give them.
Right. So yes. So I mean, this is a big topic in and of itself. But I think use of the first language can be very, very helpful. And your example, obviously, where somebody is newer to either to the class or to the ways of learning, or they have less language. Using that as a resource rather than being sort of punitive or thinking it's a bad thing. And then at the same time, don't you find that, I don't know if everyone agrees, but I always say to student teachers in our program that if you're seeing a lot of the L1 more than you'd expect, maybe based on the level of the learners, oftentimes it's a signal that the activity is just too challenging, or we haven't done enough supports or enough modeling or enough scaffolding of the task. So those are all really, really important things to think about. Have we heard something from each group? Because I'm not sure what groups people were in, I'll do a last call for reporting out before we move on. Okay, I think what I'd like to just to recap what I heard was some really great adjustments, trying things differently that seem to have the result of a lot more student interaction, student input, so using the one-question interviews for a few people, the graphic organizers, using authentic materials in different ways, even at level 1 that Brandon reported on. And these are really great examples, so I'm really delighted to know that people were finding the materials useful and the ideas useful from the webinar and the units. And so we'll do the same thing between this webinar and the next one. And you'll also have a chance to kind of reflect in writing when you do the final survey about other things that you've tried and ways you've incorporated things. So I think if everyone's okay, we'll go ahead and move to the next. Yeah, let's see for the... Let's see, let me get that chat back up. I missed the question a second here. For the one-person interview, it might be helpful if the teacher took a cell phone video. Yeah, so say more, Pesha. What were you thinking?
Just explain it. Sometimes explaining how to ask a question, like how you want to ask the question is different if you just like take a quick cell phone video. Well, we're blessed to have a classroom with smart that are easy to share video. And say, class, do you use English in this? And so they can actually see the question on the video. They can discuss it. They can say, I want you to like, take the video or be able to ask a question like that.
Yeah, good. Great idea. Great idea. Thank you. So I think, well, so should we go ahead and we'll go ahead and move on to our next theme, if everyone's okay with that. And to start off with, I want us to think a little bit about what students in your class you think are currently doing with regard to some listening and reading strategies. So take a minute, we're going to just take a minute to read through these 5 items. And think about which of these do learners use in your classes? So do you see them previewing a text and reading selectively? Do you see them determining a main idea and then explaining how it's supported by key details? Can they find details in a passage that support an argument? Can they summarize a reading or a listening or synthesize information from multiple sources? Do you see them listening and taking notes? So if you could just write the ones in the box that you see your students employing. So we've got 1, 3, and 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4. Okay, so different, less frequently 4 and 5. Okay, okay. Okay, none. Give you another minute. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So what's coming out kind of loud and clear here is that not as much the 4 and very little, if at all, 5. Okay. So 1 and 3 are mentioned pretty much for most of you. Okay. All right. So the question now is, well, why are these skills important? And then what can you do with your learners to give them practice with these skills? So partly for number 5, maybe, the thing is that as it's posed, listen to a lecture, take notes, and synthesize what they have, synthesize that with what was read is obviously a really kind of academic skill, right? It's the sort of thing that you do in a classroom, but also it's something you might do if you're in a training, a work training. And the reason I talked about lectures, if you remember from Module 1, I mentioned, from Webinar 1, I mentioned some of the research my colleague Kim and I had done back in 2007 where we looked at what people need for success in community college versus what we're doing in adult education classes. And one of the biggies that we were really missing out on was this idea of, having students listen to lectures or listen to talks of some kind, take notes, and then synthesize that with other information. So it really was absent. So I'm not surprised at all here. But I want to have us think about how those might work, how you might work that into your teaching. And we'll be redefining what we mean by lecture. What I'm going to show later is little mini talks that you can have students listen to. So first off, let's think about we're going to start, whoops, sorry, I skipped ahead. We're going to think about reading first, and let's just brainstorm for a minute. What do you read each day? Just go in the chat box. So, anything from menus to labels, email. Yeah, let's just start doing a little brainstorm here. Calendar, fake news, yeah, sadly, right. Email, magazines. Think about your environment. What do you read around you? So, text, articles. Good. Okay. So now you can keep typing, and as you're typing, now look at what we have here as examples as we look at these answers, and how do we read these differently? So let's think about. You see, who would like to suggest, what are 2 or 3 things you see here where you might use similar types of reading strategies, and then maybe 2 or 3 where you use different kinds of reading strategies? For example, if you think about things like signs, looking at advertising on public transportation. Yeah, Isabel, how do we read things like that?
You have a visual to go with it. There are pictures when you have a sign. You're driving down the road and you're reading a billboard sign. There's always an illustration with it.
Okay.
And your book, you have visuals. You have charts. If you have a bill that has arrived in the mail and you're reading a letter about an overdue bill, the actual vocabulary that you're reading is more difficult than if you're just reading a text from a friend telling you what they did the night before.
Sure. Good.
If you're reading books, it varies according to the type of book that you're reading. I know myself, I'm fluent with reading, but depending on the book I read, some I can read very quickly and others I can't because the difficulty of the language in the books.
Right.
As when we do a lesson in class, you have different degrees of difficulty.
Right. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other observations about these different types of texts and how we might read them differently? Any other things you'd like to share?
I think you scan like your email really quickly. Don't read each word.
Okay, yeah. So you might, maybe you're waiting for an email from a friend and you just kind of you look at it quickly to see if there's important information that you need, right? You may not read it for detail. And it'll always depend on what your purpose is, right? And let's see. So Dory's talking about kind of the news synopsis we get on our phone, right? And you might decide which one then to click and expand. Sure. So you kind of get the gist, prioritize, and then you might dig more deeply. Absolutely. Right. So the idea here is that we read very differently for different purposes, and we read different types of texts for different with different strategies. So let's take a look at this first list of strategies. And for example, anticipate content, read to confirm predictions, skim, scan, read for details, and make inferences. As you look at the descriptions I have here, and I'm not going to read them aloud to you, don't worry, but if you look at that, I would say that this kind of represents the traditional life skills curriculum. These are the sorts of reading strategies that we would see practiced most frequently. And then the types of texts that we would see would be kind of those functional, environmental print type things like ads or labels, right? So that's sort of what we've been doing for a long, long time in ESL instruction. Do you want to just let me, yes, you agree? Hands up if you agree with that. Would you say that's a fair assessment, right? So what we're looking at now in today's world, let's take a look at these more complex reading strategies and see if this is what we really need to be doing more of. So recognize the structure of a text, Does this represent a narrative? Is it a process? Is it a chronology? We have to help students find evidence to support claims. What is the main point? But then what's the evidence that supports the claim? Transferring information to other contexts. And we already saw that in our first webinar, this idea that you could have something written, but it can also be represented in a graphic form, like a graphic organizer. So recognizing the connections between the ways things are presented in a text and an accompanying visual, and being able to transfer information from a text to a visual, those are much more complex strategies that we need to be teaching. Interpreting information presented in a variety of forms, and then these last, summarizing text, synthesizing information from multiple sources, and analyzing the relationships within a text. So now, I'll try to say this statement not in a negative. Let's see. Raise your hand if you agree that adult ESL curricula have paid less attention to these. Right? Okay. Yeah. So no, I think, you're on board with this webinar because you're interested in this topic. And my guess is that you're then the type of teacher who is employing a lot of these and doing a lot of these things. But what I'd like to do now in the webinar today is kind of zoom in on what kinds of activities can we be doing. And we're going to start off here. The first sample we're just going to walk through in the webinar, and then the second sample, I had put the whole lesson for you on Blackboard. If you had a chance to download that, it's the lesson on the science of happiness. If you didn't have a chance to do that or print that or preview that, you'll have enough information here in the webinar to follow along, but I would highly recommend then that you go take a close look at it when we're finished here this morning. Okay? So these two charts really show the difference in how, I know people can read, but I like to highlight these as well. So they show the difference in reading, so how it was taught and how it should be. Absolutely. Yeah. This sort of represents the CCRS ELA shifts. It also represents the kinds of things that the newly developed or newly selected English language proficiency standards are focusing on. Did you want to add anything, anybody? I think I heard a mic come on. No, are we? Okay, let's go ahead and we'll have more time for Q&A. So let's just take a look, and this is kind of similar to what we did in Webinar 1 with a very simple task with Shua. But let's take a topic that's sort of a topic that is not a nonfiction, a topic that could be of interest to folks, and see what this could look like with a high beginning ESL class. I know, I agree, Dory. I feel heartsick sharing this, but anyway. So as we noted last time, a lot of curricula will include a reading, and then they'll have a series of questions, like true, false, or open-ended, or multiple choice questions. So let's just see, for example, what happens when we have the learners start with a KWL chart as a pre-reading, okay? So just simply using the KWL, it allows students to anticipate content and preview and predict a text. Okay, and then the other thing that I personally really like with KWL is that the second column allows the students to prioritize what's of interest to them. And so it becomes the reading task itself can become very learner-centered when they've determined what it is they'd like to learn more about. Now, I know that in secondary ed, I know from what I hear from K-12 teachers that KWL's kind of gone out of favor with like middle school, secondary teachers. I think that one of the explanations is that sometimes it's sort of like younger learners are not really inclined to want to reveal what they do or don't know. They don't want to lose face. And I think with adult ed teaching principles, it's just the opposite. Students are thrilled to be validated and have an opportunity to share what they know and express what it is they'd like to learn. So, KWL is certainly not groundbreaking or new or innovative, but just something as simple as adding that, and obviously it doesn't require any extra material. You can just do that with any topic, even if it's not in your existing materials. Then it allows students to read and confirm their predictions. So I wanted, just now I was going to open up other comments, tips, experiences. Sarah, did you want to share?
Yeah, hi. I work with quite low-level readers, but they have stronger oral skills. One thing, I love the framework of KWL, and I use that in the way I approach instruction, but I find the actual layout requires an awful lot of language, plus it doesn't channel them towards the reading. So I would be more likely to say, do a little true, false before they read the reading, and then do it after they read the reading and see what they learn that's different, and then ask them what questions they have so we can then do more investigations and get a different reading in. But if I say, here I could see them saying on W, what do they want to know? Well, they want to know, how many hours he works a day as a president, but the article is going to be about where he grew up,
Good. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
There can be a misdirection sometimes, I think, when it's so open. And I don't want to control the conversation. This is something I struggle with a lot. How do you scaffold and support but not control the conversation? So
Absolutely. Well, now that and when you're mentioning that, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you're so right. I totally agree with you. And a quick, like a small adjustment when we look on the next screen and we see what the text is, a small adjustment could be, what do you know about Barack Obama's personal life? Because that's what the text is about. It's not about his job. Isn't that so? I mean, what you're saying is that's such a great point. And I could make that quick adjustment even here. But I love your idea of like a pre-quiz too, to see what do they think, what do they know already about the topic, and then check that. So so we'll brainstorm some other kind of pre-activities as well. Thank you, Sarah. That's a really great point. The other thing I think too is that sometimes it's helpful to guide it a lot the first time you use these, and do it as a whole group, and then do it more in small groups, just kind of to model what's expected, just as with any of these activities. So, but then by doing any kind of a pre-activity like this, like the one Sarah suggested, or something like this, it's giving them a reason to practice the strategy, reading to confirm predictions. Whereas if you just have a text that has, questions with answers, you're not building in the strategy's instruction. So that's the idea here, is what can we do in our instruction that's going to really promote the strategy? Let's take a look at the next one. So here's the text, and the students would read the story, working with a partner, put the missing information in the boxes on the timeline. So, okay. So what would this bring to the lesson? What kinds of reading strategies does this promote? If you can type some ideas in the box, please, that would be great. So instead of just reading and answering questions, read and fill in the boxes. What do you think about what we've been talking about with rigorous instruction? I'll give you a second to think about that and type some answers there. Okay, good. Organizing information. Okay, right? Exactly. So that varied ways of showing them that we can have things graphically, information transfer. Right. All right? Exactly. So these are exactly the sorts of higher order strategies on that second slide. So while you look at those and you think, how on earth could I do that with beginners? Well, this is how you can do that with this would maybe be a high beginning, low intermediate, high intermediate. I would say high beginning, but okay, great. So let's see how that compares to some of the thoughts I had. So you're scanning. So this time the timeline really prompts you to go look specifically at the dates and the information connected to it. So you're giving people a reason to scan. And then, yes, Pesha suggests if the text were less chronological, it would make it even more challenging. It's helping them see the structure of a text, that higher order skill we talked about. So the timeline signals to the reader that it's a chronology. We're doing the information transfer and interpreting information presented in a variety of forms, right? So exactly what you guys said. Thank you. All right. Okay, now let's see what happens when we ask the right kinds of questions for the text. So take a look at the reading and then the questions, and see what you notice. So Barack Hussein Obama was born August 4th, 1961. Okay, I'll let you look at the question, answer those three questions, and see what do you notice as far as the kinds of skills students practiced, or they'd have to practice. And if you want, you can say your responses, or you can type. So, for example, instead of just saying, when was Sasha born, or when did he get married? Okay, so now it says, interpret the data. You have to find the evidence to support the claim, right? And is it verbatim from the reading, or do you have to interpret or read more deeply, right? I'm answering my own question actually there, yeah. Yeah, so you have to interpret, right? Any other ideas? So you see how asking the right kinds of questions can really serve to promote that higher order thinking and really push students to have to read closely. So when we talk about close reading and revisiting the text, it's not going to happen if we don't ask the right kinds of questions. If you ask display questions like when did he meet Michelle, students could answer that without actually understanding the text, couldn't they? But when you ask him about when he started a family, they have to demonstrate that they've looked at it carefully, closely, and really understood what they've read. Okay? So, before I move on, any questions or comments? Oh, yes, thanks, Sarah. Yeah. A display question is one where the answer, there's only one right answer and it's right there in the text, and it's not really open to interpretation. So I'll give you some, here would be display questions for this. When was Barack Hussein Obama born? When did he finish high school? When did he get his degree? What did he study? Law. So something where there's really, the students, the information is there, there's one right answer. And I already know the answer to the question. It's very obvious. Do you want to add anything to that, Sarah? Yeah, exactly. Yep. So, and sometimes people talk about that in terms of like lower order questions as opposed to higher order questions. So we always want to strive for the questions that are higher order. And unfortunately, a lot of the, I hate to say it, but a lot of the wonderful ESL materials out there, they tend to err on the display question side, in my opinion. So it's just something to be noticing when you look at materials and then think about what you could do to beef it up a little bit. And it's easy enough to do. Okay, so now let's look at some bonus skills that we've been talking about. So reading and filling in the graphic organizer is really a scaffold and a precursor for note-taking, isn't it? So if we want to work on note-taking with our students as they're reading or listening, they need to understand that they don't have to write everything. You are giving them permission to do that by virtue of just having the boxes, the date, and one piece of information. The other point I want to highlight is we're using a short nonfiction text that represents the kind of text they might encounter when they're helping their kids with homework. Obviously, if they were in a high school equivalency course, that'd be much more advanced. But it's factual information, current events, that sort of thing that could really engage adult learners more than some of the topics we might find in textbooks. So be thinking as we move on here. Just be thinking about how you might apply some of these in your own classes. So which of these, okay, so now before we move to another example, which of these do you think then are examples of effective reading or listening strategies? So you get the idea, when I talk about strategies, it's that way of engaging with the text for those purposes outlined in those boxes. So if you can just, I think what I'll do is, are there any on here that strike you as not being quite as useful? Why don't we do that this time? Are there one or two on here that maybe are not the best way to go? I'm just going to read through those. Yeah, number 7. Okay, reading aloud. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, I think so now let's take a look, and I think we concur. We agree, and I'm going to talk more about the reading aloud one in particular because I know that that can be helpful. But I would say that 4, 6, and 7, they're not always the best, and we'll talk a little bit about why here, and please chime in if you have things you'd like to add. I think having students have a teacher read aloud while students follow along, it can be a good thing, especially when they have much higher oral skills, and so they're starting to connect the oral language to what it looks like in print. But having the students read aloud from the get-go, I think can be kind of counterproductive because oftentimes they're stumbling over words, they don't know how to say things, and then they're not necessarily understanding what they're reading. And the same thing with starting from the beginning of a text and reading it word for word right away is not always the best for the same reason. So we're not really drawing on their prior knowledge. We're not using the text clues like the title, the formatting, any bold words. There's so much that we can do before they approach a text to get them understanding the gist first and making some predictions. So it's not that you would never do these things, and it's not that ultimately you wouldn't want them to be able to then read a text or listen and understand most of it, but they don't necessarily need to, because in our own lives, when we read, we often read or listen very selectively. And so what we want to do is give practice with the strategies needed in order to do that. We want students to be active readers and active listeners. And, we ourselves, as we're like Dory's example of looking at the news synopses that come on our cell phone, we don't read it in real time. We kind of we scan it, we might skim it and think, oh, I want to read that one more. That's the idea, is we want our students to start to employ those kinds of strategies so that they can manage and tackle complex text. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and again, we'll have time for more questions as we go. So you mentioned this earlier, Sarah, this idea that oftentimes our students have really advanced oral skills, or more advanced oral skills than written skills. And Pauline Gibbons, who's based in Australia, is a scholar who focuses on K-12 education. She has some really profound work and research on the idea that students have very complex intellectual thought, but they can't necessarily get it down on the page, or they can't necessarily understand it when it's written. And so what is it that we can be doing to build some bridges between their social language versus this academic language, or as Paul Guy talks about, primary versus secondary discourses? By that he means the primary is what you use day to day in your everyday life, and the secondary discourses are those more specialized discourses that are found in work or in school. And then Gibbons, again, I'll just reiterate this idea that students have intellectual thought, but how do we bridge that to actual written words? So let's think a minute about that, and just think for a minute, and any ideas, if you could put in the chat box, what are some ways that you have successfully bridged that oral language that students do have with more complex written text, reading it or writing? Any ideas before I share a sample lesson? And certainly if you want to open your mic and talk, that's fine as well. Okay, great. Good. Sarah's saying have students discuss before they're writing. Just as we have people do pre-reading and talking about a topic before we read about it, really having them flesh it out, talk about it deeply, and then give them the tasks that allow them to do that. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Any other ideas? Okay, so say a little, Dory, so note-taking, just not having to really write in complete sentences or paragraphs, but just capturing, just to make sure I understand what your idea is here, if you can confirm, just capturing the main ideas without having to write a lot before they're writing. Is that what you're talking about? I think it's great. Yeah. Beth, would you like to go ahead? Yeah, go ahead and share.
I would. One thing we've done, because my students are terrible at writing, is every class I put aside about 8 minutes and ask them to write about a topic that they're very familiar about. So, one time I asked, if you were having a dinner party, who would you invite and why? Or one night was, as a student, when you were a child, what was your school like? So all topics that they're very familiar with. Sometimes I even give them opinionated topics so they can, tell me what their thoughts are. And they know what they want to say. It's 7 minutes, and they can write it any way they want. So I just want them to express themselves.
Yeah.
And then sometimes privately, I may help them go back and give them other ways to say what they were trying to say. But that's helped a lot, build the bridge between what they're thinking and putting it down on paper.
Absolutely. And Isabel, I'll go to you in a second, but what you have here, Pesha, is similar to what Beth just shared. And it's, in a sense, it's using language experience at a more advanced level. So, that's a great idea. So listening and being a scribe for them in note form, and then they can build from there. Isabel, you wanted to share an idea?
Yes. I was fortunate enough to have a coworker that had a series of write a paragraph about these pictures activities where they're given a picture, they're told to write a paragraph, they're given a short word list that they can use to write about it, and they're given a beginning sentence. And I will give them these short writing activities. I'll say, okay, you have 15 minutes to write your paragraph. And it's really nice because they have a visual, they have some words to access that word list, and it really speaks to all the levels in the classroom. Because they may be in my class because they have a high verbal level, but when it comes to writing, I have everything from the student that has difficulty putting one sentence together to the student that has a well-developed, extended story for their paragraph.
Good. Well, right. So the varying levels of outcomes, but successes for everybody.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Thank you. That's great. That's excellent. Thank you. So some great ways of doing that. So the sample we're going to look at, because I've used pretty, somewhat lower level text, the Shua reading and then the Obama reading. So we're going to show a sample now with something that is definitely more upper intermediate to advanced. But I would like you to be thinking about the process, not the text per se. Maybe the text would be too advanced for your students, but just think of the process, because this process could apply to any text at any level. You just use different language. So we're going to do this idea of how to build this process with reading and talking as well, as you'll see, thinking about it and then writing, using graphic organizers, using the sentence and paragraph frames again, the models, and really teaching the academic language functions and some signal words they need for success. So we're going to look at using Jigsaw, one-question interview, data collection analysis with sentence frames. And I think that's what's so critical, right? We need to give them the supports, and then writing with a paragraph frame. I'm going to kind of zip through this because it's going to be very familiar. We've already seen things like this in the other webinar and in the materials, but I just want to highlight a couple features that are a little bit different from what we've looked at before. And as I said, the materials for this are on Blackboard in the resource. I created a folder called Webinar Materials. I moved the resources to Webinar Materials. So you'll see that on Blackboard. So this is a unit that I've developed, and I've taught it with students. It's also in a textbook. A version of this is in a textbook that I wrote a few years ago on the science of happiness. And the reason I chose the topic is that it's something you might see in a psychology book. When I did this sample lesson with my TEFL students, and I had a psychology major in my class, an undergrad at my university, she got all excited. She was all charged up and say, "Oh, I want to do this lesson in my practicum," because she knew this was something they were researching and talking about very actively at, in the field of psychology. So it's not some sort of, light, pop psychology. It's actually, there's research, scientific research. So she was excited about that. Now, there are several things that I do for pre-reading, but I'm kind of jumping right to the reading task. So rest assured that we could do some work on pre-reading. For example, I show photographs of people from around the world, photographs that I've taken of people in India and Bangladesh and in the United States, and have people sort of look at their faces and sort of think about what shows you that they're happy and what do you think their lives might be like. So I can share some of those ideas with you. And in fact, I think that's included in the materials, the pre-reading. But now the students are going to do Jigsaw. So there's a group A, a group B, group C, and group D. And each of the groups is assigned one portion of this article on the science of happiness. So for example, group A has this one. A psychologist in the United States suggests different kinds of happiness enhancers. One is called the Gratitude Journal, a diary in which people write down things for which they are thankful. In her study, she found that taking time to count one's blessings once a week significantly increased a subject's overall satisfaction with life during a course of 6 weeks, whereas a control group did not keep journals. keep journals had no such gains. And you're thinking, oh, Betsy, that's really advanced. But let's go back to the chart and think about what do they need to do? They have to, gratitude journal. So they have to, and they can work with other A students. They don't have to do it by themselves. They have to figure out, okay, now what is a gratitude journal? Well, we look at the text and it says, one is a gratitude journal, a diary which people write down, in which people write down things they are thankful for. So what's the definition of a gratitude journal? Can somebody just shout it out?
A diary in which people write down things for which they are thankful for.
Yeah, exactly. So you notice in the text for the learners, I underlined the words that give them the definition. And you can even tell them that. So you're directing them to this academic language that they're going to see frequently in other types of texts as well. So you're teaching the signal word in which, and you're also you're providing them with this scaffold here, the graphic organizer, a tool to record that information. Now, then they have to say, well, what's the result? Now, what signal word in this reading will show them where to find the result?
She found that.
Good, exactly. So each of the paragraphs have this they use different devices, but they have different signal words and language that we often find in academic discourse that they can then apply. Now, if you're working with a mixed level, and this again, it would be upper intermediate to advanced. This is not a beginning level lesson, but just imagine, something simpler on a simpler topic that for which you could do the same process. So think about the process. So then the students, in doing a jigsaw, remember with a jigsaw, each group fills in their part of the chart, and now they're going to mingle to try to fill in the other parts of the chart. Okay, so they have one line filled in. Their task is they have to mingle, talk to others from groups B, C, and D to find out, well, what is the technique and what was the result? Well, in order to do that, you can give them these frames. It was found that, the study showed that, the researcher found that, or when people tried blank, they blank. So actually give them those sentence frames for oral language. So they do all this work talking about the topic before they're asked to write about it. Okay? So again, this probably looks very similar. It's like the Shua lesson on steroids, right? Much more advanced, but it's the same practices. It's just with a much higher level text, with much more language practice, because the students would have the language. Now we're going to see how we could use one question interview. Well, how likely are you to try the gratitude journal? So each student is given many people will have this strip, other people will have B, C, and D. They're given, they do the one question interview and they collect data for the group using tally marks. And then they can sit down with others who had the same question and see what they found. Most people, some people, 2/3 of the class. We could graph it. And then we can write about it using all that information. So this is a review. We saw all of these steps in webinar 1, but now we're seeing what it could look like at a much more advanced level. Now, I know we're getting short on time. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of go through if you don't mind, I want to go through the analysis of this actually with you, and then I just have one more sample before we leave. I don't want to keep you beyond our scheduled time. So what academic language strategies, and critical thinking were practiced in the activities? We're going to do a 1 minute. 1 minute. Let's just jot some ideas in the chat box. So doing the jigsaw, highlighting the signal words, teaching the language frames, analyzing that information, graphing. Just type a few ideas. What kinds of academic language, the language strategies, or critical thinking did these steps promote? Let's just get 1 or 2 ideas in the chat box before I go ahead. Anybody?
They connected the written work to a visual.
Mm-hmm. Right. In academic language, summarizing, right? Good, thank you. Okay. Because we're a little short on time, and this is a bit review of what we did last time at a higher level, just look at all this. Just look at all the academic language and related skills we worked on through these steps. So the Jigsaw, one question interview, analysis, graphing, and paragraph frames. So you're really just beefing it up tenfold as compared to what you might see. So let me tell you, I did a scan several years ago of academic reading texts in preparation for one of my TESOL presentations, and to really confirm the fact that most academic reading textbooks for ESL do not really give practice in these skills the ways that they could, because they're by and large will be a reading and then multiple choice questions or open-ended questions that simply check for comprehension. Might do a little bit of analysis if they're good questions. Look at how easy it is to enhance anything you're teaching. And none of these really require extra handouts. It's just a way of rethinking your instruction. Okay? So I'm going to move on here. So I want to just show you quickly before we leave how this might look when you're teaching listening. So these same principles apply for teaching listening. So a listening text is just like a reading text. And this lesson is in Blackboard. So when you go to, you'll see the resources and you'll see Jessica Jones' listening lesson. It's the same material. And I just want to give you a snapshot of what this looks like. So the first step is having students think about something that surprised them as they came to a new culture. And I share one or two examples of my own. My example was going to the Dominican Republic, and my son had strep throat. We went to the clinic at the resort, and they just said, oh, here. They just handed us some antibiotics. No culture. They didn't see a doctor. And my husband was perfectly fine with that. But I was really, oh, my gosh, no, we have to do a culture. And my husband looked at the drugs and said, well, they're not expired, and they're from India. They're good. They're fine. And my son took the antibiotics, and he was just fine. His strep throat cleared up. So that would be an example where there was a cultural difference that had to do with medicine that really struck me. So as students talk about things that surprised them, then they share what were the topics, what did they talk about. So I'm sharing here some samples from the last time I did this activity with a group, and some of the cultural differences that were identified were things to do with shopping, safety, work, etiquette, food, education. That list would be dependent on the group that you do the lesson with. And again, the full lesson plan, you'll see that in your materials. Now, students listen to somebody talk. And I want to just highlight the idea of using short 1-minute video clips with your students on any topic. Now, we are going to listen to the video. And see, what does Sina talk about? So as you listen, what themes do you hear? Is he talking about education? Is he talking about work? Is he talking about etiquette? What strikes him as he's moving into a new culture?
I've lived in the United States for over 20 years now, but one of the first things that struck me when I came here has to do with food and eating habits. The first thing that struck me was how people eat in the street and in public. You would see someone drinking pop in the bus. The other thing that I found odd was how in an office environment people would sit at their desk and eat alone. I always considered food or lunch a collective activity where we would sit together and relax and enjoy conversation and so on. I found eating on your own rather sad and unhealthy somehow. The third thing that I found interesting is that people would be eating something without necessarily offering it to you. Again, where I come from, in Iran, people always at least go through the gesture of offering you a piece of the cake or a sip of the drink that they're having. But here, no, it's considered something personal, and they eat and drink in front of you. And even now, I would say after well over 20 years, I am still struck by that and haven't gotten used to it yet.
Okay, so which of these themes does Sina talk about? Just if you could. Food. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Etiquette. Sharing is part of it, right? What else? Yeah. Good. Good. So, right. Work culture and how people eat together or don't eat together. Right. So all I did was ask Sina, tell me something that surprised you when you moved to the United States. And so it was unscripted, totally authentic. So it's like a little mini lecture in a sense, but it's really high interest. So I'm going to share, I have two others. I have one of my colleague Julia talking about her experience in Spain, and I have one of my experience living in France for many years. So with those videos, and I'll put those on Blackboard for you, the 3 clips, the first step was to listen and, identify the theme. And then the second time we do a jigsaw. So students A have one grid, student B has a different grid, and now they have to listen and find more details for each of us about our experiences of crossing culture. Then as a follow-up, we can do one question interview again, or we can do a more open-ended grid, like a mingle grid activity to fill in. But these are the kinds of questions you could have. Can you ask how much money people make? What will people think if you do? In your country, what do people do when they want to visit? Do they call first? Can you visit without calling? Who pays for a meal when you go out for lunch or dinner as a group, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really high interest topic. It's more academic in nature than a typical culture lesson. It's also helping them build some background knowledge about American culture, that sort of cultural capital that oftentimes we make assumptions about. So this is a type of lesson that can serve to do that. So as you, go back, and we can put the PowerPoint in a Blackboard for you because I know we're going a little quickly now. But again, look at all these great listening strategies that we're practicing by just using these short clips. So you can record these clips with any topic to accompany any kind of lesson that you're teaching. Okay, let's get back. I'm going to come back to this when we close, if you don't mind. Let me just spell out our next steps, and then we'll close with some reflections on some big takeaways for today. We're going to keep learning through the module. So if you could choose a different unit of interest to you in Module 1 in the Link CSL Pro materials. I'm also going to, you'll see I've assigned that you watch one of 2 videos. And all of the materials and all of the directions are in Blackboard. So I'd like you to watch either the lesson on teaching reading or teaching listening that's at New American Horizons. Those are also built into your modules, so maybe you've already done them. But I thought just for easy access, I'd give you the task and the direct link to New American Horizons for next time. So before next time, your task is to think about one thing from the video that you'd like to try in your class. Okay, and be ready to share that. Try one new idea that you gleaned from the video. What did you try that was different, and what were the outcomes, either for teaching listening or for teaching reading? And then I'd like the administrators we're going to do the elevator speech again because I think that's kind of a powerful way to reflect and synthesize. Going to now, this time, what are 2 to 3 concrete ways teachers in your program could promote more rigorous instruction? So the first time it was, well, why should we do it? And now what are some concrete ways that you might do it? So those are the things that we'd like you to do before March 3rd. So in closing, let's just go back. And we can do mics or typing. What are some, 1 or 2 things that really stood out for you today that you found really helpful? Feel free to use your, to go on video or audio, or just type some ideas as we wrap up, because I know it's 11 o'clock. Okay, thanks, Niall. Okay, good, good. Anybody else? The idea of display questions, Okay, yeah, so thinking that graphic organizers are a note-taking tool, right? And then just this idea, I'm glad that you're highlighting just they're simple strategies. It's not about redoing the curriculum. It's about rethinking our teaching. Yes, good. Now, rigorize the textbook. I love that, Pesha. We should coin that. We'll coin that. We'll bottle that. Isabel, go ahead. I know you have your hand up. You can speak while we're reading the comments as well.
I like the two charts like Persia did of the reading strategies that we are using because I find we do a lot of them without really consciously thinking of that we're doing them.
Yes.
And it's nice to see it actually written out and printed out so you can consciously be aware that, yes, we need to do these specific types of things.
Yes.
I also liked the being able to print out your paragraph frames, your sample questions that we can use when we go back and teach the lessons.
Good, good. Well, so I know we're over time. It's a little after 11. I just really want to thank all of you for your extremely active participation and being so well prepared for your group discussions. I think Dory and Kate would agree that you've really made some really valuable contributions for yourselves and to one another and to this project and process. So if you have questions in the meantime between now and March 3rd, when you go into Blackboard and you take a look at the tasks now for this coming four weeks, please do email me at any time if you have questions. I don't know if Kate or Dory, if you have any closing comments or thoughts, but I don't want to keep people. Yes, go ahead, Isabel.
You had commented on the fact that many of the textbooks we have today do not put us into the higher thinking skills activities that, like, they'll have the true-false question and just answer true or false without extending it and having the students say why. Do you know of any particular textbooks that do make that transition, that do push it to the higher level skills in the activities they present?
Well, I always hesitate to start critiquing any particular, and I think there are many series that do a great job, and I'm not a classroom teacher, so I don't have my hands in the text as much as, you all do. I think, two series that for whatever reason, maybe, they've been sent to me. I mean, we use Ventures a lot here locally in the Twin Cities. We use Futures a lot in the Twin Cities. It's often very regional. So again, I don't want to hesitate. I know Sarah's done amazing work. I know there are texts from all the publishers that are moving in this direction. So I don't want to make a blanket critique, but what I want to highlight what you just said there is that, you can just so easily switch the question. Like if it's just true, false, then you just add, well, so why? Yeah. So, like Sarah said, that true and false can prompt the critical thinking as you ask them to cite the evidence that tells you why it's true or false. So even if it's not spelled out in the text itself, sometimes it is in the teacher's guide. Sometimes it's not on the page of the learner page. But it's, again, applying these strategies to, as Pesha said, rigorize what we're doing. But I think that, I think the texts are doing a better and better job of including little like side boxes with academic language students need. They're using more graphic organizers. So is that a helpful response? I'm not trying to, be evasive.
I agree.
Yeah, I think, so it's like looking at these with a critical eye for both what they are doing, but also what we need to add, right? I think that's what it boils down to doing. So thank you. Well, again, I don't want to keep people too far over the time. So this is recorded if you wanted to go back and review, and I do apologize. We whipped through it a little faster that last 15 minutes, so I'm going to put the PowerPoint, or, Kate or I will put the PowerPoint itself in the materials as well. So if you just want to click through that at your leisure and not listen again. I just wish you all a wonderful week, and a few weeks. I'll see you in March. All right. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.